Welcome everybody to our Microsoft 365 Copilot special. I'm Rob Quickenden, CTO at Cisilion and Microsoft MVP, and I'm joined as usual today by members of our customer advisory panel, and also have the pleasure of being joined by Paula Costa from Microsoft, who's the person you won't recognise. Today we are going to be talking about Copilot, what it is, how it works, its availability, and most importantly, what organisations need to start thinking about in order to prepare for using Copilot in their organisations once it becomes available. We've got a lot of people joining today that are new to the show, so I wanted just to quickly share the format of how today is going to run. So I'm joined, as I said, today by members of our Fireside chat panel. Each of our members represents a different organisation within a different sector. So we get a real mix of blended experience of everybody, and they're really experts in their own right. So again, I thank you all for joining and being a loyal supporter of this cause for the last couple of years. We meet once a month to talk about tech news or events or just areas that are of particular interest to the panel. This is hosted and steered by myself, but very much the stars of the show and the informers are our panel members. Today's show is going to be a little bit different, and the majority of today will be Paula and myself talking about Copilot and the opportunities and the challenges around what that represents. And our panel are here to share some of their specific questions, which hopefully will be similar questions which you will have, which we will share to Microsoft for answers, hopefully across those things. Before we start, I really want to thank everybody for registering and tuning in and spending some time with us today. We've been absolutely overwhelmed by the interest in this topic, so it's clearly we picked the right topic to talk about. Really hope you find it enjoyable and informative. Before we start, I have got a slight disclaimer, which I just wanted to set out now. As you can appreciate, this is all very, very new. There's lots of moving parts and lots of work being done behind the scenes. So there may be some questions that you've got, and please do feel free to pop them into the chat. But there may be some questions that we simply are not allowed to answer today, or we just don't know the answers to yet. And as much as that, your questions are valuable, and I think actually Microsoft really value the questions that you'll be asking, because there's lots of moving parts, lots of updates to come. And so even if we can't answer your questions, please do throw them into the chat. Right, so on with the show now we've got that bit out of the way. So artificial intelligence is not new. We've seen it within products for quite a long time now, but it's really only the last 6 months or so where we found AI in conversations pretty much around every part of an organization, every department, every person. So somewhere people are talking about AI and how it's going to affect them. The launch of ChatGPT at the end of last year, I think certainly has rocketed conversations around different parts of the business, and in particular the role that generative AI, so chat, is going to have in people's roles. And there's lots of fears, lots of excitement, all those kind of things, and so it's obvious that this is such an important topic that we wanted to talk and share about, and hopefully, as I say, you'll learn lots today. Back in March, Microsoft announced almost out of nowhere Microsoft 365 Copilot, which a lot of people have I've seen compared to Clippy. But shortly after that, Microsoft have announced Copilots for almost all of their clouds, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But what are these Copilots? And I'm sure most of you know. I'm sure you've all played around with ChatGPT and other chat-based tools. But really, these Copilots will bring natural language AI chatbots front and center to pretty much every Microsoft 365 app and service that you'll be using. They use generative AI, which in turn uses machine learning to respond to user prompts, to surface information about almost anything within your organization. That can be creating new content, summarizing content, summarizing meetings, generating actions, almost anything you can think about that you would do as a human being. Copilot is there to assist, and I think this is going to really revolutionize the way in which we work with technology. So probably a really good time, Paula, to hand over to you. Just going to ask you to briefly introduce yourself, and talk to us a little bit about the concept of Copilot within Microsoft and really kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I work in the partner team. I'm the modern work sort of strategy lead, working with partners like Cisilion. So I thought what I'd just start off with is just talking about what the concept of Copilot is. And then that will help explain, how Copilot works, where you're going to start seeing a lot more noise around in the market, etc. So Copilot, if you think of it, is your personal expert helper that can help you complete really complex tasks. So, this isn't Clippy. This is quite, revolutionary, moving on from Clippy, and what it can do for you is, quite phenomenal. But Microsoft has released a Copilot for every one of our Microsoft Cloud experiences. And you can see from this slide here all the different Copilots we've recently announced. But we're also making Copilot as a platform available to customers, so customers can start to build their own Copilots and their own, expert helpers within their organizations. And the Copilot is kind of sort of two really defining properties. So firstly, it's that ability to talk to it in a natural language. So you just have that conversational interface, and it remembers, the conversations that you're having, and you can keep prompting it and asking questions. And then the second piece is that it's built on these large language models like ChatGPT, and that means that it can, do really complex tasks. And we'll come on to, some of the stuff that it can do. And you think of that as a foundation. As those large language models improve in their ability to do more complex tasks, every Copilot that is built on that foundation will benefit from that. So, not just the Microsoft Copilots that we've created, but where customers create their own Copilots. And today, I know we're going to focus on Microsoft 365 Copilot. So that's the Copilot that will help you, do your best work in your Microsoft applications like Word, Excel, Teams, etc. And sorry, I've just forgotten where I was going with that. So so we're going to focus on Microsoft 365 today. And I think really important with this one is that, how is it going to work? Is it going to work straight out of the box, or are there things that customers need to do? And I think, Rob, we're going to deep dive into this a little bit more, aren't we? I think you're on mute.
I am on mute, so I didn't realize somebody muted me. Sorry about that. I think what's so interesting, Paul, as well, is I think just this is just the amount of interest around the concept of this is just absolutely phenomenal. And I think, I don't have a conversation with a client now without Copilot coming up in conversation. It's funny, a lot of it's about people just want to get their hands on this stuff, right? Everyone just wants to, like anything new, right? And I think, if we look at how ChatGPT was over Christmas, I'm sure everyone wrote Christmas cards and poems and all sorts of other kind of crazy things, as well as, trying to cheat at exams. But it's just really interesting how, it's technology that is not kind of for the IT geek, it's really for everybody. And it's going to make everybody just be able to maximize the way they use the products that they live in every day. And I think for me, it's just that point of so many people don't know how to use any of the advanced features in the tools that we have. And I think where tools like Copilot are going to bring things alive is just to put this in reach of everybody. And I think that's absolutely just going to elevate the level of creativity that we have.
And I think, the point you're touching on there is quite important. Is like at the moment, we do 90% of the work, and then AI comes in and does that sort of final 10% where it might do the spelling or a grammar check. Whereas actually this is flipping it completely the other way, where actually, Copilot's going to do 80% of that work. And then you're going to do that last 20%, which, helps take that drudgery out of, some of the stuff where we're trying to create content, we're trying to find, the files that we need for that, the content, etc. If we can use Copilot to create some of that stuff, and it can do that within seconds, rather than, it may take me an hour to put together a slide deck once I've got all the information. But if we can do that in seconds with Copilot, then that gives me that time and that opportunity to be more innovative and, really do my best work, because I've already got a great starting place. So.
I think a lot of it's the safety, isn't it? I think, you know, that those that have tried, you know, some of the public domain tools and stuff, which are great, and I think I would definitely encourage that, because there's certainly a way of interfacing with these tools. It's a bit like, you know, I'm sure you've all got an Alexa or you know, or Google Assist or Apple Home or something like that at home, but you know, my children get really frustrated with these things, because you ask it a question, doesn't quite understand what you are, and I think, you know, it's actually really good practice, you know, particularly, you know, kids are great at this stuff, I think, but certainly, you know, people of my generation and older, probably this is new. So I think actually having some of these public domain tools are great, because it gets us to start practicing, you know, how we want to interface with the technology, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to, before we move on, I was just going to address the elephant in the room, because I get, you know, one of the questions when everyone talks about Copilot is, you know, when can I get it? You know, when's it coming out? What's it going to cost? And those kind of things. So I talked about my disclaimer at the beginning. But, you know, firstly, just to be clear, you know, nothing has been formally announced. I know there's lots of rumors floating around on the internet. So Microsoft announced the product, right? So we know it's coming. We know it's been developed. We know it's real. But this is quite normal with Microsoft, right? So, you know, there's usually a big announcement, you know, usually at a big event time, so Ignite or something like that. But, you know, this was a bit out of the blue. But then we see multiple preview stages. So this is kind of how Microsoft work. And we are still, you know, right at the beginning of those real preview stages. And those preview stages are so important. You know, we've been part of some of these early adopter programs with Microsoft before, because it's really about them gauging how products are used, and you know, and feedback from people about how to administer them, how to use them, things they like and don't like, and those things. But then what we typically find is then, you know, things like licensing and pricing and those things get announced much closer to the release date, or as things enter kind of public preview. There's often, I'm not saying there will be, but there's often introductory pricing on some of these things. There certainly were with products like Teams Premium and those kind of things, where there were perhaps missing features. So I would expect, just from experience, a similar thing will happen. So, you know, today it is in preview. It's currently in the US only. I think all the and that's quite important actually for people to understand. So all of the large language model processing, which obviously Copilot uses, is done in the US today. So that will of course evolve over time, and Paula, in a minute I'm sure you're going to tell us a little bit about, you know, some of the huge investments Microsoft are making in this kind of technology. So I just wanted to share that fact, because I know we're going to get loads of questions about this stuff before and after. So I just wanted to put that out there. The best way to get the information is to talk to your Microsoft account manager. There will be information fed. They've got a great blog on AI where they share all of these things as it comes out. So it is coming, but we can't tell you when, and we can't tell you how much.
Yeah, but I think what we have shared is, you know, the products that customers need to be on to be able to enable Copilot. So, you know, you have to be on Microsoft 365 E3 or E5. It can't be a combination of, you know, Office 365 and EMS. It has to be Microsoft 365. And then for the sort of smaller customers, it's Business Premium or Business Standard. And we talk about their, you know, being on those platforms and getting yourself AI ready, so you're ready to, you know, roll out Copilot as and when it does land.
Yeah, exactly. And Paul, I thought it'd be a good opportunity for us to talk now a little bit about, you know, just the amount of work going on behind the scenes, and, you know, some of the things that Microsoft are producing to help organizations get ready, and you know, and we know there'll be more coming, and there'll be things also coming out to help partners. But, you know, to me, there's a couple of really key things that are going to be, you know, you touched on the licensing, the base licensing that required, but there's also, you know, a lot of things organizations need to start thinking about and doing in order to get the best from these kind of technologies, right? Because it's all about the data and the insights that Copilot's going to have in order to actually surface that information.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, if you really think about AI is as good as your data. So if your data that you have, in this case within your Microsoft 365 tenant, is, you know, not well organized, it's not well classified or up to date, etc., then, you know, what AI is going to spit out will reflect the state of your data. So I think, this is a good opportunity for everyone to start thinking about their sort of data hygiene and how they're managing and almost enforcing that across the organisation.
Yeah, and I think if I give some examples of that, I think adoption of the core Microsoft 365 technology stack, I think, is really important. And that's not to say that everything has to be in 365, but it's obviously going to make a difference. But I think it's about some really simple things around and some of this comes back to adoption and change, and some of this just goes back to educating and training people and encouraging best practice. But if you allow people to just store everything on their desktop, and everyone just emails multiple copies of stuff all over the place, and there's no data governance in place, and there's no it's just it would be hard for a human to work out what content is what. Then actually Copilot's going to struggle with this stuff as well. So I think it is a really good opportunity to start looking at simple things like are people using OneDrive properly? Do people understand how to use versioning? Are you labeling and classifying data? And just to start looking at how that usage is. Now we know there's going to be so Microsoft announced at Microsoft Build last month that there will be plugins and connectors and these kind of things coming, but it stands to reason that Copilot is going to do its best job when the data it's operating of is within its reach, right? So within the 365 arena. So I think it's also a really great opportunity, particularly if you've got to make adjustments to your licensing. So if you've got to look at moving people up, consolidating from those different SKUs into a common base level, that you also look at getting the best out of that 365 investment. So whether that's moving legacy file shares into OneDrive or SharePoint, and just really driving that adoption and getting people confident with using the tools today. I'm sure you've got some comments on that, Paula, as well.
Yeah, I think one, we want people to get good value out of their investment, whether it is deploying Copilot or not. If you're paying for a Microsoft 365 license, then make sure that you are getting the best out of that investment. But yeah, we'll really be looking at customers need to be using the cloud workload. So you've got to be using Teams for this to really work. Outlook, Exchange. Storing your documents in the cloud. So, if you're storing things on your hard drive, it's not going to be as effective. If you're sharing documents, sharing links as opposed to attaching a document to an email, just, practices like that will help, when it comes to land, and help with that search facility as, Copilot searches through documents and things that you're accessing and using. So that will really start to help make Copilot more effective in your organisation.
Yeah, I think and I can see some of the questions coming through on the chat. So firstly, thank you for those. We are going to cover some of those actually. I think of all the questions that have been asked so far, you're not alone. Some of our panel have answered these, so we will be going through these in a moment. But I think the other really important point to talk about, Paula, is the difference perhaps between how Copilot is going to work with regards its language model, and for example, the service is more in the public domain, so the likes of ChatGPT, for example. So how are these different? Right, they're both powered by the same back end. How are they different with regards to organizational data and access?
Yeah, so we talked about earlier that sort of foundational model of what they're built on. They're built on the technology of the large language models, but the data that the Microsoft 365 Copilot is going to be using is your organization's data that was within your Microsoft 365 tenant and within your boundaries. And when you create content within Copilot, unless you actively share it, it's not going to go beyond those boundaries. It's not going to go into the public domain. It's not going to be used to train the large language models and things like that. So I think what's really great here is that, with the Microsoft 365 Copilot, it's going to inherit your organization's security, compliance, and privacy policies that you set as part of your Microsoft 365 tenant.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think the other thing I guess is the guidance of preparation to think about as well, is it's a really good time to start reviewing what you do around data governance, right? So everything from retention policies on data. So if you've got loads of really old data that you don't need to keep, that you have no legal requirements to keep, that you can clean up, right? Because all that data is there to be churned on. Do you have policies in place for labeling content? So do you know what information is personal or financial data? Is that data actually secured properly? Have you just got plethoras of team sites all over the place where everyone can access everything? Or are you the other way, and actually all information is kind of you have to request everything to access anything, and those kind of things are obviously going to have an impact to the way in which Copilot works, right? Because Copilot is going to work in the context of you as a user, so it's not. It kind of reminds me. I think we spoke about this before, Paul. It reminds me a little bit of when, if any of you remember, when Microsoft Delve, as it was called, came out, and I remember actually the organisation I was working at the time. Literally, we were getting phone calls from people like, everyone can see everything. Why can they see all these documents I've been working on? And of course, Delve is the same. And, the tools around some of the Viva Insights tools, for example, are all around trying to help you. They're all around trying to surface information that could be useful, that you've got access to, that your teams are working on, for example. But it can be quite overwhelming when suddenly you start seeing documents that other people have worked on that you may not even know about, that have been edited. So there is a little bit of a fear factor of, wow, is all my security right? And actually, that's what some of those tools are telling you, right? So I think if you haven't, it's a really good time to start looking at your data governance and protection. Because as Paula said, Copilot's only going to operate within the security boundaries that you have set within your organization, and that's not down to Microsoft to fix, right? That's down to you as an organization and how you've structured your Microsoft 365 environment. So I think it's a really key point to talk about, and certainly something that I think most of you will probably spend a bit of time on. Right, now we had a whole load of different questions that came through, and I'm looking at the chat, and there's quite a few coming through. Now our wonderful panel, thank you firstly. So prior to this, and normally we're a little bit more gung-ho on these, but we've got some questions which I think will be very similar to the questions that I'm sure you've all got, and I've asked each member of the panel, pretty much member of the panel, to present a question back. So I hope these will resonate with some of the questions that you've got. I'm just going to go through the list in no particular order. I did write an order down, but I'm just going to go through in order. So panel, if you could please just introduce yourself before you ask your question. Just say who you are, where you're from, and if you wouldn't mind asking your question, and then Paula, if you're happy to kind of take the first shot of answering that, any that you want to pass across to us that are more partner play, then please do so, and hopefully we'll have a bit of fun with this. So Alex, I'm going to pick on you first, if that's all right.
Yeah, that's fine. Hello, my name's Alex Taylor. I'm the Group IT Director at AWIN. And my question for Paula and for Microsoft is, will Copilot also have features that assist and target those with accessibility needs?
So I want to say with Copilot is it will help you unlock the accessibility features that are already within, Windows or Microsoft 365, etc. So, if you think that today, probably a lot of people don't know what accessibility features are there, and there's an awful lot that we've already built into products. And having Copilot can help you unlock those if you need, audio, or if you need more visual impairment help or things like that. Having a Copilot there that you can help you turn on those features. So definitely in that front. But it's also, if you think about from us as if we're creating content, also getting Copilot to help us create content that's more accessible. So we can just ask Copilot to make sure, is this accessible? What accessibility features would you add to this to help my audience, etc. So yeah, absolutely, I think it will help unlock the features that we've got, and obviously we're always developing new accessibility features.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Paula. Nothing to add. Dave.
Thanks. David Maskell, Information Security Officer at Thatcham Research. Paul and Rob, I think you've answered my question mostly, really, which is around data governance, really, and ensuring that Microsoft sort of contain the information and data that we share and make sure it's secure. But I don't know whether you can expand on that any further. And then the sort of follow-up to that really is around, will Copilot work with data that's not in 365 and a tenant? And I'm thinking here mainly around legacy file shares and things that we have on-prem at the moment that we're arguably looking to migrate, but won't be migrated in a short term.
Yeah, I mean, it is going to predominantly work with data that is in the Microsoft 365 cloud and within your tenant. So it's not going to go searching for public data. When you put in a prompt, it will ground itself in your business data, and that helps, with that data being more accurate. But there is the opportunity, and you'll start to see, like, ISVs, etc., bringing this is where they can bring Copilot plugins, and that's bringing external data sources into that safe environment that's still within your sort of data boundaries and your privacy and security controls. So we will start to see external data opportunities, but as I said, it will be in a very safe and controlled environment. Rob, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, the other thing I'd probably add as well, and again, some of this is my opinion from experience rather than a Microsoft stated fact. So bear with me and take it with a pinch of salt. But I think I think you will see a lot more assistance from Microsoft in terms of what's available through things like Fast Track, which for those that don't know what Fast Track is essentially a free advisory service from Microsoft, delivered by Microsoft or through Microsoft's Fast Track partners, that can help organizations prepare and migrate to cloud and adopt cloud services and things. But I think you'll start to see more assistance in things like getting data from those legacy, we call them legacy, but non-cloud native services into Microsoft 365. And also I think we'll see more, and there's already a lot out there if you don't know about them, to help you shift from other third-party cloud services. So don't want to name any off the top of my head, but any of those other third-party collaboration and file sharing tools to help bring those into 365. I think the other thing I would say is I wouldn't be surprised if those vendors, whilst they will produce, those ISVs will produce these plugins and tools, they're going to probably cost, I would assume. And if you think about other Microsoft services like Sentinel and those kind of things, Microsoft are always a lot more generous with the way that the commercials work around ingesting data from their own service as well. So whilst none of this is official, this is just from experience of how I would see these working. If you can get your content into 365, I think you're going to get a better experience and probably better value. So again, my opinion, not Microsoft's.
Yeah, just sort of following up on that, there's a follow-up to that in the chat. But we've talked about organisations and what they need to do to get ready around, document classification, etc. But what about employees? Because I'm thinking here, there's got to be a level of education and training to employees around how they're understanding to classify documents, to protect what does the company believe is, confidential, etc. So what's your thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, that's a really key point, actually. And I think, lots of organizations are really great at, and these words get used all the time, adoption and change management. They can't get used in a sentence and, shortened down to ACM. But there is, I still believe, I know Microsoft have got data around these things, that there is still generally quite poor adoption of all of the core Microsoft 365 stack, right? So I know from experience of working with different organizations how much we still rely on. We just email files to each other and these kind of things. And quite often, unless we automate these things, then in fact I read some data a little while ago from some Microsoft research which talked about information classification and labeling, right? So protecting documents, and organizations that have fully manual classifications of data. So for example, you send an email, it contains confidential information, Outlook automatically labels that as confidential and prevents it being shared outside the organization unless someone overrides it, those kind of things. if it's only manual, the adoption of those things are really low because people just forget and they just send an email and everyone trusts each other. When those things are automatic, it's used far more because, you know, sometimes information gets classified incorrectly and secured when actually it perhaps shouldn't be. But just helping people to be more aware of the tools that they've got. So do they know all the tools that they've got? Do they know how to share things, you know, in a collaborative fashion? Or do they just default back to the basics of, I'll just send an email attachment? And we've probably all been there before where, you know, we're trying to get everyone to work on a file and jointly collaborate on a document. And then somebody, for whatever reason, just has a problem, or, you know, they click save and don't think it's saved. So they take a copy of that document and then email a copy to everybody else. And it completely breaks, obviously, the, you know, the version history and kind of the general flow of work. But those things can be quite important when we think about the kind of content that Copilot's going to operate on, right? And it's, you know, that having a kind of single vision of truth is going to be quite important. So adoption is really, really important, as you say. And I think it's also just about IT working with, you know, partners if they need to, right? So if you don't have a training company, a training department within inside your organization, or you don't have change managers within your organization, then I think it's a good time to start. You know, Copilot is going to affect everybody. It's going to affect everybody's role. It's going to affect pretty much every interface they have. Even if it's not about training, I think it's really important to start looking at, you know, listening to the voice of all of your employees. You know, what are they concerned about? What are they excited about? What's their perception of what this is going to be? Because we've all heard things, you know, there's lots of stuff around social media. You know, Microsoft have got a lot of press out there as well. But I think unless you actually get everybody together and get departmental representation to really understand the impact it could have on the organization, it's going to be a massive hill to climb, I think, when these things come out. And worst case, no one will use it because everyone will either be scared to use it, or it will just create, you know, to your point, rubbish in, rubbish out. It will just create garbage. So I do think that adoption piece is important, but it goes all the way through the business. So I think that's a really, really important point. Paula. Yeah,
and they don't need to wait for Copilot to start looking at that. They should be looking at that now.
Absolutely, yeah. 100%. Thank you. Good segue. Ken, I think you had a question as well too.
Yep. So my name is Ken Dickey. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Leathwaite, which is a global executive search firm. And actually, it's really interesting because you've kind of bounced around a topic that's kind of dear to my heart, and we've kind of covered it in many different ways. But what I hear and what gives me cause for concern, I'd love to get some insight on this. What we're talking about here is fundamentally data structures, how they're formed, and you're talking about best practice, etc. And look, everybody on the call here, I'm pretty sure every single person put their hand up and say, if you ask them, is your data in a robust, architected, designed way, handled in a certain fashion, not one of us would put our hands up, because fundamentally we've evolved over 20 years when we've had Clippy and that didn't work, right? So my point here is, you know, is there expectations? You talk about, you know, the idea of getting adoption up and running and people working with the tools they have, but having worked with some large language models and understanding data itself, what are the expectations around data, how you make it accessible? Is Microsoft going to kind of put some lines in the sand and say, yes, it's in your Office 365 cloud, but you have to have this structure supporting this architecture to do this, otherwise Copilot won't work? Or is it going to be incredibly adaptive and be able to accommodate pretty much any approach to how you handle data?
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously everyone who's got, you know, the perfect data organization, then, you know, you're going to get the best out of Copilot, but it's still going to work. And we're introducing something called semantic indexing. So this is, you know, something we're bringing to every sort of Microsoft 365 customer. And this will start to be a much more intelligent search through data. So if we did, say, a search on, you know, something about the latest Tesla project or something like that, it would know that Tesla's an electric car, and it would start to look for content around electric cars as well as Tesla. And so where people haven't necessarily labeled a document correctly, or they'll know that, you know, certain people are working on this project, it will start to bring up and start indexing that type of content, so you're getting a much more relevant. So whilst having the perfect data would mean that a Copilot would be the perfect virtual assistant, actually some of the tools that we're bringing are going to help sort of overcome some of those challenges, and semantic indexing is just one of those.
Just to kind of get into that just a little bit, but just out of curiosity more than anything else, how far into the indexing, because if you're starting to talk about querying documents, etc., and looking at content, that presents itself a whole new challenge as well. When we're talking about security, access, and everything else that we've mentioned earlier. I mean, is this purely indexing at a file level, or actually we're looking at something that's really quite powerful that goes into the content inside those documents?
Well, remember that it's only going to look at content that you as an individual has access to. So it's not going to go into files that that user doesn't have access to. So if there's confidential information in a password protected file that user doesn't have access, it's not going to go and look at that. So it's only looking at what a user can access. So that should help protect that privacy and that security element within when it's doing its indexing.
And I think the other point to note is, of course, this is also very heavily tied into the probably best well kept secret, but the Microsoft Graph, right? So that is all around connecting, and Microsoft already has this kind of intelligence within 365 that is aware of. It's why it's always greater than the sum of the parts of just it's a product to do file sharing or a product to do meetings. In that all of that signaling between what data is, where it is, who it's created, how it's shared, the meeting context, organizational structure, those kind of things are they're there, right? They're within 365 and your Azure Active Directory today as well. So this is really learning. It's leveraging that framework as well of things. So as an example, you might expect to get, and again, haven't got it to play with, but you kind of expect the intelligence around, understanding who people are within the organization. So if you don't have access to something, but your manager has, then, I would expect to start seeing as these models get better to say, well, actually, maybe go and talk to your manager, So to the point about it's going to adhere to the data governance and security that goes across everything. That includes all your cloud apps and stuff in the future as those things get connected, that is applied across the organization. Now, how that's going to work across more formal data structures, so maybe HR systems or information contained within Azure databases and those kind of things that you might have, I think that's probably where the next stage comes. As Paula talked about, there is a Copilot for everything. And whilst it's going to follow the same kind of format, each of those things I think is going to have some of its own challenges as well. So I think as this starts to progress further down the preview stages, I think once semantic index for Copilot is released, which I imagine will be relatively soon, that's really when organizations will have the opportunity to start looking at what information Copilot would be able to surface. And that's kind of there's a couple of really great videos, actually. I'll share them in the comments later, that Microsoft Mechanics have done that talk about how this kind of data indexing and surfacing of information is going to show. It's actually really nice. Did think about showing it on here, but it's about 9 minutes long. So I'll share that in the link, but it's really useful just to let you get that kind of understanding of how it works. Happy with that, Paula? Anything else to add?
No, very good.
Thank you. Great question, Ken. Thank you. Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Appreciated. This is a bit of a wide question, really, because it's just regarding sort of the ethical use of sort of AI in the respect of, if I actually ask a question currently, it's a case of that person interprets it, sends it back. But in the future, it could be AI actually replying on behalf of the individual. And yes, with Copilot, they go in there, can see that response. But the question is, I suppose, in the future, who's answering the question? Is it the professional or is it AI? And I know that's down to us as organisations to actually look at how we actually adopt this technology. But it's just an interesting sort of concept going forward.
Yeah, I think that comes down to sort of responsible AI. So you know, Copilot is designed that the human's always in control and always at that center. So, you know, we make it clear that they need to decide, you know, what they keep or discard. Where content's being generated by AI, that it's clearly labeled that this is being generated by AI, and where it's used, you know, documentation and data, it cites the sources, etc. So I think, you know, having that, you know, responsible approach to AI should help, you know, make sure that we're not just sending out answers or responding to stuff without actually having that opportunity to vet it and verify it ourselves as humans.
I think a big part of that comes back to the adoption piece, doesn't it? And awareness of kind of what to expect. And I think that the fear is always, do I trust the AI, right? And I think if the point Paula made at the beginning, I think was really good about actually where we spend all of our time creating content. And I'm sure we've all done it, right? We sit there with a blank PowerPoint page, right? And none of the automatic templates are any good for us. And we really struggle to start, right? It's like anything you do, it's always that starting point that's hard. Even just thinking about the format of today, it's that initial piece that's hard. And I think if we can take that effort away, that's great. But because we are still the finishers, we are still the humans, it's, to me, again, that point, it boils back down to us. It's down to us to validate and check. And whilst, you know, Kevin, you'll be able to ask, you know, Copilot for something, it's not the user responding, right? So you're not going to get a response from me that's actually my AI. It's not like when you have a personal assistant such, and, you know, it responds on your behalf and organises your meetings for you. But I think it is going to be, you know, you will use the AI to help you with the response, or a person will use Copilot to go and get some information that they would normally ask you for, and you would go and get it. So I think there's a little bit of that human touch that might disappear, but the Copilot is going to surface that information rather than you know, bothering somebody else and asking somebody else. So I think there's also another ethic there around, actually, will we lose touch with the people that we normally collaborate with? Because quite often those, you know how it starts, those conversations start with have you got the information on this? Before you know it, you're talking about something else. But yeah, it's down to us, I think, to validate and check the information that comes back from these tools. Jazz, did you want to ask your question?
Jazz from Gateley here. Paula, you mentioned earlier that it's going to be, well, Copilot won't be able to leverage public data in the same way as things like ChatGPT will, so won't necessarily have the same regulatory challenges as that. But what work are Microsoft doing at a regulatory, with regards to regulation from a country, and more specifically an industry level, to ensure that Copilot aligns with regulatory requirements? And you've also just mentioned that individuals need to decide what they do with data, but that's not always going to be as simple as individual deciding or mandating what they do, because they'll already have definition around their regulatory frameworks as to what they can do with that data and how they can utilize that data, especially when a machine's been involved.
Yeah, you know, obviously there's a lot going on at the moment with different governments pushing for regulations, and we're definitely, you know, at the forefront of there, saying that this industry's got to be, or AI's got to be regulated. So for the moment, you know, we are adhering to our Microsoft 365 terms. So you know, everything that you can set within Microsoft 365, Copilot will also inherit. But there's obviously a lot happening. So what I would just say is, you know, we will adapt as and when these things land, and change as we need to. Have you got anything else to add there, Rob?
No, I think only, I mean, probably just to back that up from certainly, you know, what exists today in the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, right, around, you know, and some of those things, you know, you do need to enable and configure and check, but there is a lot of regulatory compliance guidance, and, you know, so they talk about what Microsoft are doing within that industry or within that geo area, and there's also a load of things that, you know, you are required to do as the organization to do those things, and so there are some good checklists in there to do that. To your point, I would expect Copilot to adhere by those things. You know, Microsoft take this stuff very, very seriously. This is also, I suspect, you know, one of the reasons that they will control very carefully the the future preview stages till it gets to that point, because they've got to make sure those things, some countries are really strong on this stuff, others less so. But you as an organisation will have, as you quite rightly said, you'll have regulatory compliance that you need to adhere to. So it's important that whatever Microsoft does around Copilot doesn't go against what's within the rest of your 365 tenancy. And there is also, as I say, a lot of that's going to come back to user adoption and training and those kind of things. And just there's a lot of people trust everything. My kids trust everything. They ask Alexa anything. If it says it's going to rain and it's a beautiful sunny day, she says yes, they believe it. It's also a little bit about understand where it helps, what it does and what it doesn't do. And that early adoption phase, not just from what Microsoft are doing, but what you do internally, is going to be key. So we talked about adoption again a little bit earlier on, but I think building a kind of almost like a task force and a success team within your organization about picking up some of these questions as well, I think are going to be absolutely vital. There's going to be so many forums around this kind of format, and I'd suggest that we all do that, right? Certainly we are. We're starting to look at this stuff ourselves. We've got more questions than we have answers today, but that's good. I had one other one. I'm just conscious of time. In fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to. Sorry for those I've not come to, but we will address them. But Paula, we had a couple of questions, didn't we? That we were quite keen to ask all of you actually, and again, anyone listening would welcome your questions as well. Do you want me to ask the questions? I'll ask the questions, Paula, and I'll pick some people who haven't spoken yet to give us their thoughts on them. So. We talked about, Ken, you mentioned a couple of points earlier, but we've talked about ethical challenges and those things with Copilot as well. So for us, the question I would love to ask you is, what do you see as the ethical challenges moving forward with Copilot? So, jobs, upskilling, what conversations have happened already within your organization about AI and in particular Copilot? Madassa, do you want to answer that one first?
Sure. Hi, Madassa from Waverton Investment Management. I think it's an interesting point. There's been a lot of conversation internally around the use cases and individuals. Job displacement is probably one of the key items. I think it's fair to say that AI alongside business automation, you can kind of compare the two product sets together and actually, as mentioned earlier, I think Copilot is complementary. It needs a human intervention. So I think the concern around job displacement is very minimal in our organization, at least. I think it's fair to say that skill gap and upskilling is probably the key area that we will be considering. And naturally, AI technologies will often require new skills and knowledge. And businesses like us may face challenges ensuring that our workforce have the necessary skills to effectively use the tools like Copilot. So upskilling our staff and having some training initiatives is probably going to become quite vital in bridging the skill gap potentially. And also looking at the ESI platform for Microsoft for the training that's available now. There's already AI fundamentals out. So I think some of my guys are already jumping on the bandwagon now to develop their skill sets. I mean, that's from an admin perspective, but naturally from an end user perspective, we've already started conversations. I've got a presentation on the 6th of July, funny enough, with Microsoft attending to talk to my investment managers there. So just to kind of slowly introduce the concepts. But I think having policies around this as well is going to be quite key for us to ensure that it's formally done and it's announced correctly in the correct methods.
And is it something that you would see rolling out to every employee, or would you look at, you get to a certain level and you get a Copilot assistant, or how are you looking at it?
Well, it's interesting because the conversation that started initially within Waverton started off with a subset of users within the investment team. We call them the ones that are tech savvy. They started piloting Bard. They started using ChatGPT. Interesting, I wasn't aware that my marketing team was using ChatGPT as well. But the purpose there was to just understand the concepts. What we've done at the back of that is decided to create a small working group. Essentially, that will be our go-to team to essentially trial these and provide feedback. And the session on the 6th of July actually is not all staff. It's actually just the investment team and some key heads of areas, just to understand the use cases. We've already had a lot of requests upon how they expect teams to benefit them going forward, i.e. the summary of notes and remove the need of minute taking, shall we say. So I think that's an obvious candidate that many of us require. But to answer your question, no, I'm going to start off small with a subset and then expand out based on use cases and needs within the business.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I think definitely the starting with whatever you call it, a task force, an internal pilot group is great. So I think so it's a really interesting one. I guess it also comes down to what's good cost, right, as well. That's going to be obviously be a decision factor, and just how productive it does make us, and whether it simply pays for itself with the productivity gains. James, did you have any other thoughts around ethical challenges? I guess in your sector.
Yeah, it's an interesting consideration. So I'm James Davis from Anicio Health, and we focus on digital products into the NHS and the health system. So when we look at concepts like this, it's really an intriguing one, as people are at times most reluctant to adopt AI when it comes to their health. But it's something that isn't new. It's been around for quite some time. We've had AI supporting clinicians for a significant period, and there's been a lot that has come out, especially in dermatology and cancer screening, where AI has been really helpful. And for me, I up until very recently have been very focused, as has been said, on how it is that we regulate in order to answer these challenges around ethical challenges. And just this week has been released at digitalregulations.innovation.nhs.uk. You can now go onto that site and have a look at the regulations for adopting AI and digital technology and the standards associated for health and social care, which is a really helpful resource. So that again is digitalregulations.innovation.nhs.uk, and you'll find developer and adopter guidance there, which is super helpful because we've all got so many questions. But as Madassa said, I think throughout the health and social care arena, digital literacy and capabilities in order to use these tools in combination with your day-to-day activities will be really vital, really, really important. And I think seeing these tools as a value add, not a replacement to the emotional intelligence and the physical interaction we need in the health service is really pivotal too.
Yeah, 100% agree with that, James. Yeah, thank you. Really agree with that. Got one more question to ask back, and then we'll have to start to wrap up. So, Aidan, I'm not going to let you escape without questions. One of the other questions we had, and we kind of covered this a little bit earlier on, but was how do you think people within the organisation will respond to content generated by AI? Right, so. Will you make it obvious that content is being created by AI rather than a real human? And do you think people will trust the data that it kind of produces, or will they just throw it back to someone else to verify that it's correct?
I think I don't think I'd probably differentiate between what's being created by a human and AI. The challenge around trust of who's created it, because at the end of the day, it will still be someone sending it out in their name. It's not going to be the AI creating the document and then sending it out straight away. It's there to assist the person in reducing the legwork and sort of producing the document in the first place. They're still going to, if the AI, I was supposed to coin Paolo earlier, if the AI does 90% of the work and the person does the 10% of the reviewing it at that point instead of the reverse, then they're still going to be sending the final version out, and it'll still be sort of producing their name. So I don't see that being an issue, and I wouldn't sort of see the need to sort of, I don't know, cover everything the AI has created in the document in yellow and the human's done the 10% in white. I don't see any need for that differentiation. And I think the trust flows off the back of that, because at the end of the day, it's still going to be me sending that document out as I've done the final pass, the final review on it. It's just instead of sort of a team of us working together to create it, then 50, 80, 90% of it may have been created by AI. The last 10% of the editing has been done by all of us collaboratively editing it, hopefully, instead of multiple versions being sent around on a spreadsheet or an email, should I say. But
I think there's probably a bigger. I'd say personally, the bigger worries we'd have wouldn't be so much that what's been created. It's the how it would impact people's jobs and how it would impact people's roles. I think that's probably the bigger, more sort of societal challenge, or the sort of people challenge of it, really, rather than it being the actual tooling and technology itself.
Yeah, I think there's also that point around, again, I keep honing in on it, but we talk about responsible AI, but also responsible people, in that, particularly if we start looking at some of the tools where, you might miss a meeting, for example, right? So we look about Copilot in Teams, you might miss a meeting, the notes will be, the meeting will be recorded, which I guess is the go-to place to kind of listen on. And then, of course, summaries can be generated, right? And in fact, some of this technology exists today within Teams Premium. And I've been in meetings before where it's transcribed and it's generated meeting notes and actions, and it's like, I never said that. Now, so it's that point about making sure people always go back and validate and verify the information that's been presented. So I think that's really important that we explore that and we look at where interpretation is incorrect, because just like humans misinterpret information, it's inevitable that I guess Copilot will as well. Paul, anything to add to that point?
I think the most important thing is that whoever's using the Copilot, they're always in control, and I think there's the risk that people might get lazy and might decide to just send something without checking it. I think we've got to be really clear that shouldn't be the case. There is still that human intervention to check through, make sure everything's accurate. I think that is going to be really important for people to understand as Copilot is rolled out.
Totally right. So where's the time gone? We've got about 3 minutes left, so I think we've got to wrap up. Thank you for for all of the questions, everybody. Thank you for the participation panel. Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much for taking your time out to talk about this. But you are the expert. Before we go, just want to share a couple of nuggets of information, kind of some of the things that we've talked about today. We have produced a guide, a short guide. I call it an ebook. I'm not allowed to, but short guide. We will be sending that out to all of you that have registered with just some of our guidance and advice. But essentially, the key things we talked about, right, that I think are your 5 things to start thinking about. No particular order, but review your data, right? It's a great time to start thinking about where is your data. Have you got the right retention policies in place? Have you got things like data loss prevention and encryption and those kind of things on data that needs to be protected and governed? Have you got the right security on your team sites and your SharePoint sites and those kind of things? Number 2 is that adoption of 365. So is there data that you can bring into 365 to make the experience better when Copilot is there, so you don't have to rely on third-party plugins and connectors when those things become available? Number 3 is your licensing, right? So we know there's going to be a cost associated to these things. It's worth spending time thinking about who Copilot may benefit. It's worth looking at shadow IT. So are there other products and services that you're consuming from third-party vendors that maybe your 365 license can cover? So it's a good opportunity as well to start thinking about, can you trim some of that down? Are there services that you can adopt within 365 and perhaps save money elsewhere so that you can prepare better for these things? We talked about building I've called it a Copilot success unit, but really think about building that team internally to feed and channel questions that you're going to have from employees, to set aside some of those, maybe some of those job loss fears, and to get people to start thinking about the ways in which Copilot and using AI generally in your organization can benefit everybody, so it's not seen as a big fear. We want to build some excitement around these things. And finally, and kind of linked to that point, is that prepare people for change. So I think having those open conversations, really thinking about the training that people have had to get the best out of the products they've already got, links back to point 2. And as we get closer to to availability and previews and those kind of things, who are those people in those teams going to be? How are you going to communicate how to work, and how you're going to create that ethical use of AI within your organization? So we cover this in a little bit more within the guide that we've released. So thank you again so much, everybody, for joining us today. Really hope you found it useful. We really care about your feedback because, you know, if it's something that's important, we want to run more of these. So thank you, panel. Thank you, Paula. Thank you. And see you on the next Fireside Chat next month.
Thank you.